faster you execute technical actions, the higher the player's level. Look, today I'm going to be fast, and tomorrow I already am. No, this is a process.
Football intelligence of how the body is placed, where it's positioned for all this to come and to do the technical action. But there are many things that go behind that technical action, or just being talented.
I think it's very important that everyone knows that football can be played in many ways, right? And there's no bad way or any. If you do it with coherence, everyone can understand football in many ways, right? He's always alone. No. He's always alone because he's always well positioned. He's smart. He detects spaces. Because Buzy is the clear example of mental speed. 10 minutes before the ball reaches him, he already knew what he had to do. At a higher level, everything goes faster. You're required to do it just as well or better, but also from a speed of execution standpoint, everything goes faster.
Jordi, what is football intelligence? What do you mean by that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think football intelligence, basically, in a nutshell, is understanding the game. So, in a player's development, in all the circumstances that affect a player's development, there's obviously physical work, tactical work, medical care, taking care of your body, 1,001 things that influence the player. But for me, the fact of understanding the game is very important. And when I say understanding the game, what am I referring to? Well, to a series, and here a series of concepts appear, ideas that have to do with location, with body positioning, with positioning myself to give continuity to the game. A series of concepts that are workable, trainable, and that give you a clear vision of the game, so you can understand the game, so you know why I do things, so I can give it continuity. And basically, among all of them, mental speed stands out for me. That is, that you're able to execute all actions as quickly as possible, that you're able to execute technical actions, tactical actions as quickly as possible. And I think that in the end, ultimately, at the highest level, that's what makes the difference, right? Being able to execute things as quickly as possible. Therefore, when we talk about football intelligence, it's a broad concept, but from my point of view, when I refer to IQ, I basically mean this: a series of ideas, concepts, even attitudes that make you really understand the game, that help you know exactly why you do them, and that basically give you a clear comparative advantage over others if you're able to fully assimilate them, right?
Yes. Well, later we'll go into more detail on how it's trained, but I want to understand what makes a player mentally slow, even if they're physically fast or have the skills. What makes them mentally slower?
Well, first, as you say, being physically fast is an indisputable advantage. A physically fast player in today's football world is fantastic, right? It's a great quality, but it has nothing to do with being mentally fast. So, of course, when we have a player who is mentally fast and physically fast, we're looking at exceptional players, right? When I talk about mental speed, well, I'm referring to the player's ability to think very quickly, to execute all actions as fast as possible, and for everything to move faster than normal. And basically by that, I mean that, when a player receives the ball, the big difference is that before receiving the ball, they've already decided, they already know perfectly well what they're going to do.
Sure.
Or the one who, when they receive it, has to stop, has to perform the technical action of control, then I think, and then I execute. No. The one who is mentally fast, among many other things, but basically it's when the ball comes to them, they've already decided exactly what they're going to do with it. And that, which is easy to say, is hard to do, but I repeat, for the very best players at the highest level, that's what makes the difference. The faster you execute technical actions, the higher the player's level is. And that, as you were saying before, it's not simple, it's not easy. If it were simple or easy, anyone would do it. But it's perfectly trainable and perfectly improvable. And especially in the player's formative stages, it's essential that they take this on, that they understand this, and basically that they know why they're doing it.
Sure. Well, and something we mentioned quite a bit, the fact that this is trained from a very young age. Players starting to play football here in Spain, especially, are already having these concepts introduced into the game already. You see that as they grow, they all assimilate concepts because this is also a matter of time. This isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that's trained for months, years, right?
Yes, like all things, let's say, complex or that make a difference or that give you a big qualitative leap, it's not simple either. It's not like today, look, today I'm going to be fast and tomorrow I already am. No, this is a process. You have to keep working, obviously, like everything. The sooner you start, the younger you assimilate these concepts, the faster you internalize them, right? And in this sense, for us, all these years in the methodological work at La Masia with all these players that everyone knows now, it's basically what makes the difference. This type of work is what is, well, it's the core of all this. Then, as I told you before, in the player's development, there are multiple aspects that influence it. You obviously have to work physically, nutrition, taking care of the body, etc., etc., etc.
It's everything. It's all wrapped up.
But having these football concepts clear, this understanding of the game, basically this mental speed, which is still a speed of execution, I think makes a big difference. But I repeat, it's a process. I'm not saying it's simple, but it's workable, trainable, and very improvable. We see the proof in all these players where you realize that sometimes people say, well, this player, or Lamine, well, how quickly he executed, or the other player, how well he oriented his body, how well he positions himself, or how well he looks for the passing lane, etc., etc., etc. Well, all this isn't just a
one-day thing, right? And people don't usually see that. I mean, they usually see, for example, Lamine Yamal.
yes.
Wow, what a great technical move he made. But no, what I think I've also been seeing over the years is that the action, what you say, the football intelligence of how the body is placed, where he positions himself for all this to perform the technical action, but there are many things that go behind that technical action or just being talented.
No, of course. In the end, when people watch a match with these players, with Fermin, with Olmo, with Lamine, with all these important players, with Eric, who are playing nowadays, or with Kubarsi, they say, Kubarsi, how well he breaks through passing lanes. Well, it's not that simple. In the end, you have to explain why I play vertically, why I break through passing lanes,
Why?
I play to the third man, which is another basic concept. Or when you see Olmo, who in very tight spaces is capable of performing technical actions, why? First, because he positions himself very well. The issue of body position, of the profiles, is essential. Or Lamine, how well he dribbles. Yes, but before dribbling very well, he must have had a perfect reception, or when someone plays one touch, or when Pedri or Fermin, in situations near the area, are able to combine, or how well they play in such little space. It's not a coincidence, it's because they execute. They've thought out the technical action beforehand.
So,
All this, which people see, but all this is a process, so it's in a series of concepts
that
are workable, that involve many hours of work, that have a whole methodology behind them, but that, I repeat, are trainable, are very improvable, and the most important thing, I believe, which I repeat, I am absolutely convinced of, all elite players, to reach the elite, all these players, great players in the world, basically, their quality is that they define very quickly, they are capable of performing technical actions very quickly. They have great mental speed. Then if on top of that I have physical speed, well, then we're talking about, but being mentally fast is difficult, but it's improvable and trainable.
that's the big difference between an amateur and a professional. And everyone, what you say, and we always come back to the same thing, mental speed. Working in tight spaces, all the mental speed, more than the physical.
Yes, this is it's a concept. First, I totally agree with you, Nico. In the end, the difference between an absolute elite player and one who isn't quite there, for me, among many things, is basically speed. In many cases, physical speed, but basically many times it's mental speed. They do everything much faster. They think everything through much earlier, of course. And that is trainable. And now many people will say, well, how do I go about? Well, there are many topics, but basically it's also a matter of all these years at La Masia, all these years at Barcelona, all these players. Basically, it's about doing drills with many variables, but doing drills in spaces, varying the spaces in tight spaces, which makes you or forces you to have to think much earlier, right? But yes, all this is a theory, but it's one of the basic ways to work on these two concepts.
Sure. And well, La Masia is world renowned for being so good at producing so many homegrown talents. And well, you've worked there for many years. You've seen a lot of players. And I think these same concepts and mental speed, drilling them into their heads or starting from a very young age with all these concepts has made, it's no coincidence that they train so much and focus so much on this, and such great players come out that today.
Yes, in the end, when you see, I repeat, all these players that everyone knows now, right? Lamine, before Lamine, Fermin, Balde, Gavi, and so many others. But prior to that, you would see Xavi, Bussi, Iniesta, all these players. When you saw, for example, Barcelona at that time combining to play so fast with one touch, what seems simple to people, this is actually very difficult.
Sure.
And all this has work behind it. It has an idea, a methodology behind it, which brings us back to the concept, which is based on being very fast mentally. And that's only achieved by working, among other things, but it's achieved by working a lot in spaces with many variables, in small spaces, varying the pressure, varying the number of touches, varying, etc., etc., etc. But this allows you to improve. And this from a very young age. When you start from a very young age through all the formative stages working on all these concepts, then in the end this happens, right? That when you reach the elite level, you see a player and you can almost identify them. Wow, this kid, has assimilated a series of concepts that make him very fast, right? We always come back to this concept, but I think
Yes.
it seems basic and essential to me. But I repeat, it's workable, it's improvable, each at their own level, but it can be done, obviously, and that's what we've done all these years.
Sure, it's been proven.
That's right, it's proven.
That's more than proven, yes. Well, now I want to see a bit more in detail how this football intelligence is built. And I want to know how the football intelligence is trained at La Masia.
Well, all those concepts you were talking about earlier, it's about focusing the work heavily on this, among many other things, right? But it's focusing the work heavily on this series of concepts. I was talking about, and from a very young age, with kids starting from 7, 8 years old in all the formative stages, methodologically everyone worked the same way. Obviously, as it couldn't be any other way, varying loads, varying concepts, varying ideas. But the idea of understanding these concepts is present throughout the entire formative process, from understanding from a young age how I have to position myself to provide passing lanes, to look for spaces, the concept sometimes of distances, the very important concept of always shaping my body before receiving the ball, the basic concept of thinking before receiving, not receiving and then thinking before receiving. This is basic.
Right, yeah.
And all this, well, among many, many types of exercises, but it's very important, as we've also mentioned, the game of working in tight spaces. And here we get into games of positional games, possession, etc., a whole theory, a whole methodology that people can understand. But whose ultimate goal, I repeat, is that the whole series of concepts that make up this football intelligence appear are worked on, and that's where you have to focus periodically and systematically throughout the whole training process, right? And it's what in the end, ultimately, naturally, well, when one of these players reaches the elite, well, you say, wow, well, how well he's played it out, how well they've come out of this pressure playing one touch.
Sure.
Or how well that in that space full of defenders, a player, in this case, for example, Olmo, is able to orient the ball, execute and shoot in a second.
Right. Well, you see it on TV, and of course, it seems, of course, it doesn't look as extreme as you see it on the field or how you experience it, and all the training behind that mentally to train that.
Exactly. For example, in Olmo's case, right? Just to give an example, Olmo is a huge player, fantastic, wonderful. But if you had to say what his main characteristic is, I think it's the ability he has to shape his body to look for that position quickly, control and execute. Then he has goals. He has many things, but that ability in very tight spaces, surrounded by opponents, of being able to look for a wall pass, of being able to control and shoot with such limited space and time, yes, that's within reach of few. It makes the difference, but it's the process of a whole job, of some very clear ideas, right? In the case of, especially the first year, I don't know, Bellingham, well, a player who always shapes himself wonderfully well towards the goal. Mbappe, well, this player who is capable when he has received the control shot, the always being well positioned, looking for these players of such a very high level, so many other examples of such a very high level. Basically, it's that they are very fast mentally.
Yes.
In Mbappe's case, the case of course, of Lamine, it's that Lamine, of course, is not only very fast physically, he's very fast mentally. Before the ball reaches him, he knows perfectly well what he's going to do. Of course, Lamine, and it's true that there's a part of innate talent, but there's a whole other part of work for many years of understanding a series of very clear ideas.
Of course, Lamine combines the technical. He's very good technically. He combines this mental speed, the mentality, the intensity as well. Of course, the pressure.
When you have players who combine that mental intelligence, that mental speed, who are also physically fast, who also have the right mindset, who also have the physique, then you're always talking about the best players in the world, right? That's what makes the difference, without a doubt.
And a pattern I see a lot in the United States and when I moved to Spain too, is that many coaches look for, every coach also has their own style of play and all that, but I've seen quite a bit that they go for the physical side. They want physical players who tall, very fast, which is fine. As I said, every coach has their own way of playing. But a pattern we see at La Masia is that the players don't stand out for their physique. They aren't very strong or very fast, but they all have, it's like a pattern we always see, right? Mental geniuses.
First, I think it's very important that everyone knows that football can be played in many ways, okay? And there isn't a bad way or any. If you do it with consistency, everyone can understand football in many ways, right? There are people who prioritize other things, we prioritize others, right? Of course, if you give me a choice, I don't know. Imagine, of course, what would I have liked? Well, I would have liked Xavi, Iniesta, Leo. Imagine some of the best players in the world in history if they had also been 2 meters tall, if they'd been 2 meters tall and strong as tanks or lions. Well, of course. So you can't have everything. So for us, the type of player sometimes, well, it's not that I want them small. What I prioritize is that they're technically good, mentally fast, that they understand the game.
Of course.
Well, they've been smaller in this case, but they were tremendously good at that.
Of course.
Of course, if a player isn't 2 meters tall and isn't very strong, well, they have to have the other thing. And the other thing is that they're mentally very fast, technically excellent. Now, if you tell me it's that you want them small, no, I'd like them all to be 2 meters tall and be... Now, it's very difficult to combine both things, so, but in our case, well, if I have to prioritize, I prefer a player who maybe physically isn't as strong, but who understands the game, is mentally fast, technically excellent, talented. So, well, but football, everyone has their own idea, everyone, and that's the greatness of this sport, right? Everyone can interpret it in their own way and their own style and their own idea, right? But I personally believe that this idea of understanding the game, of assimilating the concepts well, is basic, and that improves any type of player, no matter what they play, where they play, or who they play with.
Of course. Well, I also use my own example. From when I came from Miami to Spain, that I had I think I've repeated it in another episode, but I just had no idea about football intelligence. No one had taught me. And of course, yeah, but looking back, I'd have loved to know these concepts from the start, or to have trained them in the United States, or just be aware of how important and proven it is, like with La Masia, which has shown it so many times. And that's why it's world-renowned for being a school that produces incredible talents through this methodology. And I always say, I wish I'd known these concepts sooner, but, well, over time, being here in Spain, seeing the concepts, how they train daily, how all the players are already positioned so well, it's a different game. It's a completely different game. But anyway, over time, I've absorbed the concepts and it's changed me as a player, really.
Yes, it's what I was telling you before. Everyone interprets this wonderful game in any way they want, right? The difference here, I repeat, is in that series of concepts that make it identifiable, and also from a historical point of view, I think everyone agrees that this works and that we've been able to help train players across many eras who were fantastic, right? Because in the end, it's what you mentioned before, right? There is, of course, you have to do technical work. Of course, it's vital to master control, master passing. That's absolutely certain, and that obviously is worked on. What we try to do is take it a step further. That is, do you have to master controls? Of course, do you have to master passing? Of course. What we're talking about here is giving speed to everything. That is, it's all well and good that you master control, but you have to When the ball is in the air, when the ball reaches you, it's great that you control it wonderfully well and then make the pass. But what we try to do here is, by the time the ball arrives, you've already decided on the next move. And if you're able to do it in one touch, better than two. If you're able to, in a single-oriented control, be able to dribble past an opponent, even better. So it's taking it one step further, and it's, I repeat, because it's always the same idea, giving speed to the game, being mentally quick. And that obviously involves mastering technical concepts, absolutely. I mean, the specific repetitive work on technical actions is also important, of course, and we don't even need to discuss this, of course. But you have to try to take it a step further and be able to do everything with speed. Because in the end, what's always difficult is doing everything fast. Everything fast. Because at the elite level, the difference is always speed.
Hey, quick reminder if you're enjoying the episode. If you want to keep improving as a footballer, click the link in the description for more information on Best Version 1, our complete footballer development platform. Well, everything complements each other too.
Sure.
Having the technical foundation,
Of course.
but the core,
No tech foundation impossible.
sure. Having the technical foundation helps you execute faster too. Exactly. But the core of all this, what people really don't see, especially what I've seen in the United States, is that this football intelligence isn't trained as it should be. And I, for example, when I arrived in Spain and saw either I train this or I get left behind, there's just no other way. I had talent, I had good technique, mentally quite good too, very strong mentally, but I didn't have this part. In the gym, I could train my physique, but I was missing this. Either I caught on or I got left behind because it was the differentiating factor. So what I did was in training, once I was assimilating these concepts of what they really are, in training, I would set a guideline for myself. Okay, I'm going to scan here 10 times in training, or in this drill, I'm going to scan 10 times. Or I'm going to think about it. Think about what you're going to do in training before training, or in the game before playing. I'm going to position myself well and think it through, because before it becomes something innate, something that's natural, you have to think first about what you have to do, because of course when you're little you train and it becomes something natural over time. But me, coming from abroad at 12 years old when I came and started training this, you have to think about the fact that you're going to do it to keep improving it and for it to become something natural. And that helped me, in my case, quite a bit to improve this. Over time, I was getting the hang of it. And I'm telling you, it changed me as a player.
Of course, there's no other way. I repeat, not here. When we talk about this, no. All of this is complemented, obviously. You have to work physically, most certainly. In today's football, the physical part is fundamental. The tactical side, obviously. The nutritional side, obviously. The psychological mindset side, most certainly. This, without any doubt. Now, if to all of this, which is obviously very important, you add the fact of understanding the game, the fact of positioning yourself, and you do this from a young age, from the formative stages, I think it's a fantastic advantage. I don't know, for example, you take two kids, so little kids with a ball, and then they all have the tendency to give it to me, pass it to me, to get closer, to reduce the distance. This, which seems like an obvious thing, no. From a young age, you have to teach them that the act of supporting, this word that, no, I've given you support. The act of supporting isn't always getting closer. Sometimes it is. It's not always getting closer. Many times it's the opposite. It's moving away. It's looking for that distance so that the pass goes through. It's moving 1 meter so that the passing lane appears. It's getting myself oriented well. It's positioning myself well. It's angling myself well so that the control allows me to execute quickly. Of course, there are a series of very subtle things.
Timing is very important too.
The basic timing they give you, they teach you to understand the game, and that this has to be practiced from a young age.
Of course.
And then what happens with all these players who naturally do things that people say, oh, well, wow. Well, the example I told you before. Oh, well, Kubarsi, how well he looked for the passing lane. Well, because he's done it since he was little. We've explained to him that you have to try to break the passing lane and play the third man to give continuity to the game. For example, it's another essential concept, right? I don't know, there's a whole series of ideas, of concepts.
Yes.
That make it so you can understand the game, that truly explain to you why you do it. And I think they improve you a lot as a player. And then this has nothing to do with the coach wanting to play. The 3-4-3 and the 4-4-2, the 5-3-2, it doesn't matter. They are internal concepts that help you improve.
Individually, as a player,
Yes, then everyone plays how they want, the style they want, and does what they want, right? But I think that above all, I repeat, in the formative stages, it helps you a lot to improve and to grow. And you find examples with people where you say, it's just that this player isn't fast physically, no. But my friend, but he thinks much faster than the others.
of course.
So it's like, I'm going to press him. By the time you go to press him, he's already released the ball. So
It's the simplicity too, right?
yes, because in the end, doing things, football, sometimes people get confused. Well, no, it's that, look, he's touched it 30 times. He's able to, no, in real football, competitive football, elite football, the difficult thing, when what's truly difficult is to make it easy, to make it simple. That one touch play, being able to see that pass that no one sees with one touch and thread it through or find passing lanes. That playing facing forward, that oriented control that allows you to well finish the play. There are many concepts, many ideas, and we all go back to the same thing, to being mentally fast, to doing things quickly and at a higher level. The greater that mental speed has to be.
Without a doubt, for mental, and as I understand it, no, you're absolutely right. And it doesn't just have to be trained from a young age. I mean, I've also seen that it can be trained at 14 years old, 15 years old. In my case, 13 years old was when I really started. At 13, 14, and I was getting it. I mean, you don't have to.
No, you should.
Of course, I mean, those who are lucky enough to start training it from a young age, well, they are.
Many of these kids, we from here, who train all these, the ones that everyone knows now, Fermin, Lamine, Balde, Casade, Gavi, etc. All these players, most of them have been here since they were very little. Gavi, 10 years, Lamine, 7, 8, Fermin, 12, 13, and they've been, Eric, all these have been here for years. In their time, well, Xavi and Iniesta, Leo, all these have understood all these concepts and have made the difference, right? But then in professional teams, this is worked on a lot. What I was telling you before, varying the loads, varying the intensity, but just imagine all these drills in tight spaces with the mental speed of all these players I've mentioned. It's a spectacle. Then you see the ball, well, you don't even see it. And then it seems easy, simple, because they always play very fast, one touch. They're always well positioned, well oriented, which allows them to give continuity to the game.
Of course.
But of course, all this, that seems simple, elementary. No. All this comes from a job of understanding a series of ideas, a series of concepts that allow you to be able to play like that. Many times, it's been the case that you bring in great players, you try, and at first they struggle. They struggle because mentally they don't go as fast, even being huge players and with wonderful abilities, precisely because they are fantastic players, because technically they are very gifted, and physically too, in a short time. They take this in and realize that speed, right? But it's, it's actually perfectly trainable, and it's definitely improvable, honestly. I repeat, whatever you play, as a player, individually, they improve you a lot, I think.
And in a bit more detail, well, how exactly does an intelligent player actually move when they do not have the ball?
Well, if we speak from an offensive point of view, well, it's that player you say, it's just that player always receives the ball unmarked, right? People say he's just always open. Yeah, but it's not a coincidence. Or he always gets the ball. Well, there are players who, without the ball, are always able to be well positioned, to look, to anticipate, to have mental speed, to see the passing lanes, to always be well placed so that the ball reaches them, to always be well positioned. Or it's just that it always reaches him. Well, if it always reaches him, it's not luck. So that knowing how to always position yourself, that always looking for the distance, the timing of the movement, so that your teammate can give you the ball at the right moment. I repeat, people say, oh, how lucky, you're always open. No, you're always open because he's always well positioned, he's smart, he detects the spaces, the moment to move. And if we talk from a defensive point of view, it's exactly the opposite. From a defensive point of view, it's that player who is able to detect those passing lanes and cut them off and anticipate. And to anticipate the play, also defensively, he's fast mentally because he anticipates the play.
Yeah, no, that's key. Also, what you said about the defensive side.
Yes, because here we always talk, no, we're talking about perspective. And then when you work, and we'll talk later, I guess, more in depth about the topic of small-sided work, about positional play. There's the offensive side, but there's the defensive side, football. You have to attack and you have to defend and you have to be mentally fast, right? From an offensive point of view and from a defensive point of view to anticipate the actions. Therefore, it's complex, but it's a wonderful world. And I repeat, in the end, with time, with work, the player's individual improvement is guaranteed.
Yes, yes. And now that you've said that about how it seems you're always open, the players, I always remember that in the teams I've been on. Always that, I thought at first, especially when I didn't understand these concepts much. They never pass it to me. And the other guy, he's always receiving the ball.
Maybe you're poorly positioned.
Yes.
I thought,
Well, it must be me that I'm not in the right spaces to get the ball like the others.
I don't know. There are many times I've had the luck of, for me, surely the best player in football history, who is Messi.
And
Many times people would say, it's just that Leo walks. It's true, Leo. Sometimes he walks, but he doesn't walk just to walk. He walks and walks. He knows perfectly where he's going. So many times I say it reached him, damn, what luck it reached Leo. No, it's not luck, because Leo had enough intelligence. On top of that, he was able to read the game tactically and knew where to position himself, where to go. So all these great players bring all these concepts to excellence. Or Andres, well, it's just that Andres, what a capacity he has to beat players. Well, Andres wasn't especially fast either, but always well-oriented, well-positioned, always well-placed. Take Xavi. Xavi doesn't ask for the ball. Well, he doesn't ask for it. He doesn't ask for it. Why doesn't he ask for it? Because he's technically very gifted, but he's always providing the right outlet. They always pass to him because he's well-positioned. He always plays vertically and breaks lines. How is he so fast? And Busy, for example, they say Busy, how easy he plays. Well, that's why he's so good. That's why Busy is so... He's been the best defensive midfielder in the world by far. Why? Because Busy is the clear example of mental speed. Busy always, 10 minutes before the ball reached him, he already knew what he had to do. And he always played one touch. But he was very fast mentally, offensively, and very fast mentally, defensively. Well, yeah, he's like an octopus. He's an octopus who is very fast mentally because he always anticipated the play. So actually, there's definitely a series of elite players who have, without a doubt, made their mark, an innate capacity for all of these things, and who, in this particular sense, are actually superior to others. I really do not know. Defenders, Sergio Ramos, for a long time, an extraordinary center-back, wonderful physical conditions, but he anticipated, he read the play beforehand from a defensive point of view. So, again, mental speed,
and
the most elite individuals, those at the very top,
essential.
offensively and defensively.
If you don't have it, there are players who have it more, who stand out more, but you have to have it at a very high level. And I imagine it must have been a spectacle to share the locker room with these stars in that great era of Barca, Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, seeing them all together, training very fast, an incredible mental speed.
Sometimes like, come on, get in the rondo. No, I'm not getting in the rondo. I'm not getting in because you could barely see the ball. But what is this? Why? Because technically very good, very fast, mentally, everything one touch, very fast ball speed, always well positioned. And of course, it's a spectacle. So all this here, we are talking about the super elite. We are talking about people very gifted, technically, physically, who have been with this idea for years, all very assimilated, very clear, with a coach who is the same, Pep. It's the same idea from La Masia, made in La Masia, with that innate mental speed. Then, of course, a series of ideas come together that people say, how easy, how simple. No, easy and simple, no. This is a process. And it's an idea and it's an understanding.
Well, we'll talk more in detail about that era and your experiences and all that. In another episode, we can talk more, go deeper, more. But now I want to understand, what should a player prioritize if they want to improve their football intelligence? Right now?
Well, I think you really have to, focus on it. Like everything, you have to be consistent. Have a very clear idea, have very clear concepts, focus, and don't think that I'm going to spend a week working on these ideas. Try to think fast, try to execute fast, and that the week already has a process, it has an idea.
So it's not like I train for a week and then
I'll do it. And then I move on to something else. Everything is important, but if you focus, if you persist and work in the right way, you try to be fast, think before receiving, you improve. And I repeat, the higher the level you play at, the more you'll be required to be fast. Physically, obviously, but mentally as well. That's what makes the difference. For me, I've said it many times.
do you think that's the most noticeable change when you move up a level?
Sure.
It's the mental speed, right? That's what keeps increasing. At
The end, when you see a player from a category 3 times lower than one in the first division, don't think there are that many differences. Obviously, they work harder, they're in better physical shape, whatever you want, naturally, right? But sometimes it's a matter of nuances. There are so many good players. The main difference is the rhythm, is the intensity, is the speed. Physical speed too, but basically the speed of execution or mental speed. Everything goes faster, everyone thinks faster. I repeat, okay? Offensively and defensively. So at a higher level, everything goes faster. So you're required to do it just as well or better from a technical standpoint, but also from a standpoint of speed, of execution. Everything goes faster. And this is trainable.
Sure. For me, something where I realized what's truly most important in elite football was when I played at Getafe and they'd sometimes bring me up to the first team. I would go to train with the first team and you really notice it like a huge amount. I mean, from training in the youth ranks, the U19s, which is like the under 19 team, they were basically 18 years old and they bring you up to the first team. And besides that, you notice the physical change too, obviously, at that time as well. I was smaller, but the speed, mental, I mean, you didn't know where the ball was. It was crazy. In the small-sided games, and especially in the 2-goal small-sided games, as well as in the positioning drills, all the exercises we did had a truly brutal, almost out-of-this-world level of demand and required incredible mental speed. But since they're already so used to that rhythm, it just keeps getting better. But coming from the outside, the first time with the first team, to see this, it blows your mind.
That's why many times when a young player is brought up to the first team and spends a season training, they improve a lot because the demand is much higher. That's obvious, right? But basically, it's what you're saying, right? When you move up to the elite level with top-tier players, when the ball arrives and you stop it thinking, let's see what I do. No, sorry, they've already pressured you, taken the ball, and scored a goal. Everything moves much faster. That's why this concept exists. No. In the elite, when the ball comes, you must have already decided what you're going to do. And then obviously have the technical ability to actually do it, which we've said before is already a given. But once you have that, you either speed everything up, or you do everything much faster, or you won't have time because the other guy, the elite one, is also very fast defensively. He also thinks fast. He also anticipates very quickly. So for me, that's what makes the difference.
And what can parents do to support this development without pressure?
Well, we've talked many times about the role of parents in the kids' development process, right? And this is also something that we could spend 6 months talking about this, right? I think it's an absolutely decisive role. I've said it many times, the way the parents behave, and when I say the environment, but the immediate environment is obviously in most cases the parents, right? I think it will have a big impact. It will impact the child a lot, right? I've seen it all, I think that parents during the developmental stages have to be there. They have to help when the child is doing fantastically well keep them grounded, and when the child is down, lift them up. So they have to be there. And the word that always comes to mind here is, and what I find very important is, especially in football or when we talk about kids in a club, but in all of them, right? It happens in absolutely all of them, right? The key word for me is expectations. You have to know how to manage expectations. You shouldn't create more expectations than necessary, nor fewer. So having, as in everything, a balance, right? When things are going well,
Sure.
stay calm. And when they don't go so well, encourage and support and stay calm. Because from a footballing point of view, everything that needs to be said, the coach will tell you. Whoever needs to will tell you. Obviously, parents, of course, they can give their opinion and talk. But when parents turn into coaches, when there's pressure, there are all kinds of cases. I repeat, I won't go into detail. There are all kinds of cases. When this reaches certain levels, I think it's harmful and doesn't help at all with the player's development in any area, right? In any circumstance.
Sure. And you have to know that it's something you have to be patient to. You have to know that it's, I don't know, as we've said, it's not overnight. It's,
No.
We're constantly.
Of course, it's a process that isn't easy. It's long. Well, like all learning, it needs its process. Some will go faster, others will go slower. Some will take it in more, others better, each at their level. Not everyone has the capacity, nor will take things in the same way. But from experience, I tell you that everyone at their level improves, and they do improve, for sure. But everything has a process, and you can't, I don't know. The pressure has to, but whoever has to push you will push you from the club or from your coaches or whoever it is, right? The parent coaches, I repeat, we could talk about this for a long time.
Yes.
But, the parent coach is actually pretty complicated.
We'll cover that in another episode. So this topic, but anyway, to finish up today's episode, we'll just go ahead and wrap this up now. Thanks to Jordi again for today's episode, and we'll continue discussing more topics, and we'll be back here again.
A pleasure. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed the podcast and found the concepts we discussed interesting, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.